So if I was assessing him, I'd really try and unpick to try and get him to understand if what he's feeling is the reflection of the truth of what actually happened. Was he mistreated? Was Meghan mistreated? Or whether he's just being a bit sensitive.
If he was sensitive to a point that it became a disorder, if you found that his version of events differed so much from the reality, would there be a clinical diagnosis? What might that be?
You could have like a paranoid personality or even a paranoid personality disorder, which is pretty much what it sounds like. So it's when people are very kind of hypersensitive. They take neutral comments as being quite offensive.
It's a big day today, I think today anyway, because the Prince Harry book Spare is coming out, reports are coming out about it, and we're going to do a little bit of a psychoanalysis, are we? Or you are?
So I made some notes of things that I think I have the most to say for your viewers, and they would be like just the background between Prince Harry and Prince William and what I think has caused or contributed to this rift. Probably the most shocking thing, isn't really that shocking, but the most shocking thing that's been reported from his autobiography is that William physically attacked him. So I was going to talk about, what I think about that, and just about him airing his public, his laundry in public in general. And then if you wanted to, I know you're quite interested in Meghan Markle, so I've got a few things to say about not necessarily, her personality, but also about what I think about her and Harry going off on this journey and uncoupling from the royal family, what it all means.
Okay. Well, it's fascinating, all of this stuff. People want to know about this mysterious family behind the closed doors. No one really knows anything about them. So what happened? So I read, hang on, I'm just going to read this out, that there was an altercation. William hit Harry, and then Harry said he wanted me to hit him back, but I chose not to. So do you know what's gone on there? What's happened here?
So I've not read the autobiography, but from what I've read in various newspapers, it's pretty much what you said. So it was in 2019. They had an argument apparently because William was calling Meghan difficult, rude, and abrasive. What I think is quite interesting is that according to what Prince Harry wrote, he said insults were exchanged and then William attacked him. So it does kind of sound like we might be getting a very one-sided version of events. So he didn't say, I said anything out of order. He said insults were exchanged. He said that he kind of grabbed him by the collar and ripped his necklace. I'm not sure why he's wearing a necklace. Maybe he's in touch with his feminine side. And then sort of pushed him up. I don't think he actually punched him, but he they tussled and he fell onto the floor, and there was some sort of dog bowl behind them which broke and left a visible injury, which I don't know what that is. If it was bleeding, surely he would have said it was a cut. So I don't know, maybe a small bruise, maybe a dog bowl shaped indentation in his back.
Are you suggesting that necklaces are only worn by women? Loads of men wear necklaces, but they tend to be the sort of almost ultra aggressive. I mean, we might talk about Andrew Tate later. That's a perfect example. I'm sure he has one or two or several necklaces.
You strike me as the kind of person that has multiple necklaces.
No necklace. I don't have any. I don't have any jewelry. I'm not manly enough. I think you have to be really manly to wear those kinds of things. But it is interesting. You know what? Jokes aside, it is interesting to know that he wears a necklace and these people are wearing necklaces. I don't know why exactly, but I do find that interesting. So what is going on between these brothers over the years? I guess there's a complicated thing where what happened to Diana must be getting sort of confused amid the siblings, and they're seeing it as happening again. The press reacting to Meghan and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've made a few notes, if you don't mind me referring to them. So I think there's loads of different factors that are relevant. So the first and foremost, I think there's some sibling rivalry, right? So sibling rivalry happens more if you've got two people of the same gender who are quite similar in age, which absolutely describes our two princes. It tends to be for people who feel that they have either some favoritism shown to them by a parent, or there's some kind of difference in their status. And obviously Princess Diana is no longer with us. I don't think we know for a fact if Charles favours one prince on top of the other, but I think you could argue that the country, I don't know if favour is the right word, but the country has like a higher esteem almost automatically for William compared to Harry, because he is the future king. Like, he's got this role that he's kind of born to do, and Harry might feel like a spare part. In fact, his autobiography is actually called Spare. So I think that's one thing right off the bat, just their kind of dynamic.
Yeah, is there a way to ever not have that sibling rivalry? I try to because I had that with my brother, and it's such a shame because you look back and you go, what was that about? Is it just really common?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really common. I think there are things that fuel it. So somebody, if either or both siblings have like quite abrasive attitudes, or are quite sensitive or easily insulted or even paranoid, then it's much more likely to occur rather than if they're quite sort of timid and afraid of confrontation. But what I was saying before, I think it's the way that the parents deal with it as well. So some parents will completely fuel that for whatever reason, either because they're just bad parents, they lack empathy, or because they might think that it kind of helps to build this sense of competition in between two siblings. Whereas some parents, I think, could be really good at getting on top of it and trying to kind of cut it out at the roots before it grows into this uncontrollable weed.
I suppose if I put my empathy hat on for the royals, which I sometimes don't do, but for Prince Harry, it must have been quite difficult growing up in William's shadow. And William sort of, I think I've seen that before. Tell me if I'm wrong, that sort of dynamic where the older brother is very successful, and he's just by his birthright, he's successful, William, isn't he? Because he's going to be the king, as you say. And he's able to be a lot more, demure and very classy, and everything he does seems to be with ease. And do you think that might be responsible for Prince Harry's the various times where he's broken rank, acted out? Of course, there was the famous or infamous incident when he wore the Nazi uniform out. I mean, it's just not very becoming of a royal, is that responsible for it perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously this is a big generalization. There are a lot of exceptions, but very broadly speaking, we know, or psychologists know, that firstborns tend to be quite reliable and quite conscientious. I think we can say that about William, right? So He's very sort of serious, he's very stoic. And I think that's related to them having like a high level of expectation placed on them since they were kids. I can speak to this myself. I've got two boys, one who's 7, one who's 9, and we expect the 9-year-old to be the more mature one, and to, if they're squabbling, I couldn't word this carefully, but I think rightly or wrongly, in fact, probably wrongly, you kind of give the older one more responsibility to sort it out because he's older. He can understand things. He won't get as easily agitated in theory as the younger one. So he has the responsibility to kind of to be more mature, to act more mature. So I think that's part of it. I think probably William's natural personality as well is like that. Like, he's not kind of edgy like Harry is. He's not cheeky. He's not impulsive. And so I think it is, they both have these personalities that you'd expect from their birth order, but it also plays into their relationships. Could that have been a way to get some attention though from Harry? Would a personality develop that way, or do you think it's just an inherent thing? I think it's a little bit of both. So I think it's probably inherent in that that we all have our own individual personalities that are nature rather than nurture, number one. Number two, for the birth order, the fact that he's kind of not seen as, or probably talked to as, being as grown up, like all siblings where there's that kind of age difference. And I think also the very fact that we were saying before that he doesn't really have a role. So Prince William is the future king. What is he? What's his job? I mean, he does, obviously, he's an ambassador for the royal family, but aside from that, he doesn't have a niche. So he has to carve himself one. And I do wonder whether him being a bit controversial, I'm not saying it was calculated for the silly stuff that he did as a kid, but certainly more recently, him airing out his dirty laundry in the media, that gives him something, doesn't it? It gives him some celebrity, it gives him attention, gives him the opportunity to make millions and millions of dollars making podcasts. One of the revelations coming out from the book was that Harry had a smaller bedroom at Balmoral, which has, it sparked accusations of tone deafness from the public, especially right now when people are thinking about how to pay their bills, can't even heat their own homes. And we've got a guy who is a royal who's had everything handed to him, which has its own drawbacks, of course. But I suppose that kind of thing, you're only comparing to what you know and who's in your direct immediate vicinity. So that's, I suppose that's the kind of thing that speaks to exactly what you're saying. There's a couple of ways you could look at this, really. I mean, he's privileged and he's massively entitled. There's absolutely no question about that. And he's in a very, very lucky position, especially financially. But I suppose the counter argument to that is that he didn't choose any of this himself. And so from his own perspective, he feels that he's being kind of targeted and wronged by members of the royal public, members of the royal family and the media in general. So he feels that he's kind of being victimized. And I think that's also part of his personality as well. I think he's easy to he easily takes offense and he easily feels like people aren't treating him fair.
And he wants reconciliation now, but first he wants accountability. Is that another sort of thing about status? Is that when you're accountable, do you think, I'm just thinking out loud here, if you say that was my fault, are you pushing yourself down so that the status sort of, there's more an equilibrium?
Well, firstly, I don't know whether he truly actually wants reconciliation. I mean, he says he does, because that's the right thing to say. And if you want to be perceived as the one who's the bigger person, as wants to make up. But does he really want that? Because if he did, why would he release, why would he go on Oprah? Why would he do a Netflix documentary? Why would he release a fairly damning autobiography? If your main aim was to make up with your brother, then surely you'd do none of those things. You would just try and reach out to your brother and maybe, use intermediary. So I'm not saying he completely doesn't want any reconciliation, but to me, his behaviors suggest that there are other things that are more important to him than reconciliation. That's what I think.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's something that I always say, and a lot of people are saying, which is, how many Netflix adaptations and documentaries and books and things do they have to do until people leave them alone? It's a joke that they obviously don't want to be left alone because they don't want to stop talking. On the other hand, how frustrating must it be to feel like there's a narrative out there about you and you want to change that narrative, right? So that must be a bit of a driver.
Yeah, and despite everything I've said, I have to say that I do have a degree of sympathy or empathy for Harry and Meghan both after watching the Netflix documentary, because I think it did show actually that if what they say is correct, which is another huge thing, because as we were saying before, you've only got really the perspective of the storyteller, don't you? But if what they say is accurate, then they were treated completely differently to how William and Kate were. So I can kind of understand why they would feel aggrieved. But I think going back to the point we were making before, how much do the public care, or not even care, because obviously we care because we're consuming it all, but how much can we relate to it, and how much concern and empathy do we have towards them? So just to go on a kind of slight tangent related to that, one thing that I think is really interesting and also pretty hypocritical is that they said a few years ago that they want to separate themselves from the royal family and they want to be financially independent. I mean, to me, that's complete bullshit, because they're not financially independent. Even if they wanted to be, they're not. So do you know how much they got paid for the Netflix documentary?
Bet it was more than I got paid for most of my episodes of this podcast.
Have a guess.
Oh, anything I guess, because I want to just say a wild number now, but then it'll be too high and it'll make what you say sounds like 50 billion. It's got to be, is it in the millions?
Yeah.
For just sitting there like plonkers saying things. So what is it? Come on, 10 million.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's $10 million. $10 million. So you and I, as struggling podcasters, YouTubers, know how hard it is I'm not even breaking even, let alone making a profit.
Please give to Dr. Shahom. Please, we'll leave his address in the description.
I need money to afford more gold tea. I'm running away here. But no, but seriously, it takes so much time and effort to do a podcast and to make it stand out and to advertise it and to get guests and blah, 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 blah. And it takes, people years, and they're not necessarily that successful at it. You get someone like Harry and Meghan who come out and they get paid $10 million just to do one Netflix documentary. And I'm sure they had a deal with Spotify for their podcast. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was in the millions of pounds. So I guess my point being, I know not everything's about money, but you can't, in my view, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I don't want anything to do with the royal family because they've mistreated me and I want to be independent, but then go and make literally millions and millions of dollars from exactly what that is, from coming from that space. So I calculated how long it would take somebody on an average salary in the UK to make that amount of money. Do you want to have a guess how many years?
To make 10 million? 20,000 a year, 5 years, 50 years.
So the $10 million is 8.4 million pounds, and the average salary in the UK, according to Alexa today, when I asked her, was 39,000. So it would take the average person 215 years to make that money. 215. That's if you didn't spend a penny. If you saved everything that you had, it would take the average person 215 years to make what they'd have done. I imagine, a couple of weeks of recording, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months.
It's also the prestige and the and the reach, that podcast, obviously I was more jealous about the podcast, and I have a problem saying I'm jealous, because we are working our bottoms off here to get these things out. They signed the contract to do the podcast with their Archetype or Archetype or whatever it's called production company. They signed that like a year before releasing anything. They took ages. In that time, Netflix cancelled various projects with them. The point is, they weren't turning up. They weren't doing the work. They weren't doing the work well. And still they were getting opportunity after opportunity. So a lot of us in the creative industries, I think, do look at them a little bit differently to how some of the public do. And we do think, oh, come on, this is so unfair. And look, life is unfair. Okay, so fine. But I think what we don't want is to then hear the constant complaining. That's the problem. Yeah. And I am trying to be two-sided in this, because I know it's such a controversial topic. So the other side to that is, well, what should they do? Just shut up and just go home? But I suppose this is it. They could go to do their, podcasts and documentaries without complaining about how things are really difficult for them, while other people are struggling to, make ends meet.
And I suppose something that you said yourself, which I completely agree with, is maybe he feels like it's the only way that he can actually be heard. Because according to what Prince Harry said in his documentary, and again, this is his version of events, I'm assuming that he's telling the truth. There is a very different narrative from the royal family and from the palace about William. So he has his own team, and they quash stories that are in any way negative about William. And according to Harry, they not only did they not do that, but there's suspicions that they might have even planted stories about Meghan to make her look difficult and to make her look like a not a particularly nice person. And if that is true, then I suppose you can see Harry's point. He tries to complain, he tries to do the right thing by going through the right channels and having his own press team, and none of that's working for years. You can kind of understand why he eventually manages to escape, using his kind of terminology, and then you'd want to kind of speak out and say, actually, everything you've heard is not true. This is the truth. I
think it's just, as you say, it's the hypocrisy that's really difficult, and the double standards and the tone deafness, when we're all struggling. There's that feeling, he'll lecture about climate change or some of the other royals, because they are by far, they're not the only ones who deserve any blame in this. The royals, of course, they're a weird bunch. Of course they are. How could you not be a weird bunch of people if you've been brought up believing you are divine? You are like the representation of God, and everybody else is beneath you. That is literally what the whole point of the monarchy sort of is. So they're weird guy. They're not blameless either. And I don't want to hear from Prince Charles. He's quite keen on the environment, and I'm happy he is, but I don't want to hear from him all this stuff while they private jet around the world. I think that's what a lot of people have a problem with. It's the, by all means be regal and posh and whatever you want to be, but don't lecture like your minions for like not putting the rubbish out in the right place or whatever when you're getting jets around the world.
So following on from that, what do you think, Andrew, in general, about Prince Harry coming out, writing his autobiography, going on Oprah, doing the documentary? What do you think? I
think he's an idiot. Just hearing him speak, I don't think he's very smart, and why would he be? Because he's not worldly. He's the Nazi uniform and all that stuff. But then I also feel sorry for him. He has a right to be an idiot. Most of us are, and most of us grew up and reacted and acted out and things. I wonder if there is an aspect of maybe it's misogynist to say sort of the Yoko Ono syndrome, but I'm sure it happens just as often where, somebody gets a boyfriend and it's a man who sort of changes things. But I've seen it a lot in my life with men and women in my life. They get a new partner, and you get Harry coming out with stuff like, I was bigoted before, and it's like, well, goddamn right you were. Of course you were, but we don't want to hear, this is it. I don't want to hear him now lecturing at me because we didn't do things as bigoted as what he did. So that's it. But this is what I want to ask you though, because he killed 25 people. That's another thing that came out. It's a weird thing that this is a prince of England in this sort of civilized age. And I understand why he did. He was part of the army. And I think he killed 25 people. So do you think that might have some effect in some of his defensiveness, some of his personality?
I didn't know about that, actually. This is the first that I've heard of it. I mean, I suppose it depends on how he perceives that. I imagine he would have perceived that as what you just said, as part of his role, as part of his duty. I can't imagine that he would be massively traumatized by doing that, again, because he was actually doing it in his role. I suppose something else we've not really talked about is the death of Diana. And according to what he said in the past, in fact, I think he said it to Oprah, if I'm remembering this correctly, that it really affected him really badly, that he had like anxiety, depression, He used drugs quite heavily. He said he had panic attacks regularly from the age of 28 to 32. So I think that probably had far more of an impact than what he did in the line of duty. And no matter what you think about him, according to him, he was not allowed to share his emotions or to talk about it even with family members. And he walked away feeling massively unsupported. And, you've got to admit, he was only 12 at the time. Even if there's parts of his personality that might grate on you or anybody else now, it's pretty tragic to think of a 12-year-old kid who's lost their mother, who has literally not even no support, but is actually kind of being pushed away at arm's length when he tries to get some comfort from family members. So if that's true, I mean, that's kind of horrible, isn't it? But what I think is quite interesting about that is, why does William not say the same thing? Does that mean William was offered more support, or does it mean that William's naturally stoic, so he didn't need that level of support? Or maybe he feels the same way, but he's not willing to speak out against the family because part of his role is to kind of be stoic and to represent them.
I wonder if it is exactly what you say, it's the role. And you just said about Prince Harry, it wouldn't have affected him killing those people. What he said in his book was he saw them as chess pieces taken off the board. And it wasn't a statistic that filled me with pride, the 25 enemy fighters that he killed, but nor did it make me ashamed. When I was plunged into the heat and confusion of battle, I didn't think about those as 25 people. You can't kill people if you see them as people. In truth, you can't hurt people if you see them as people. They were chess pieces taken off the board, bad guys eliminated before they kill good guys. They trained me to other them, and they trained me well. And as you know, Prince William was trained to be the king, the future king. And I can see, it's almost a recipe for this happening. And that's I don't mean to judge any individual here. This was a recipe, I guess, a cocktail of, okay, we're going to raise these kids. Their mother's going to die. A horrible, horrible bunch of events happen. They're not going to trust the press. But one of them is given a slightly bigger room at Balmoral Castle. One of them is given more duties and roles and things, and is going to be the future king, and has the Queen Elizabeth, his grandma, to look at as this sort of beacon of stoicism. And the other is like, well, spare. So I am starting to see how that would happen. And I suppose it's just the reason William might not have spoken out is just like Prince Harry felt it was his duty to kill those people, it's Prince William's duty to be king and to be solemn and to not say a word. Yeah,
and to never kind of speak out against the establishment. I suppose the other thing, and as I said, I didn't know about what the Harry killing 25 people. This is the first I've heard of it. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit unfair here. Maybe I'm being a bit over cynical, but it does feel as if it might be a bit of a slight humble brag to me. Like, look at me, I'm a tortured soul, and I've had to, do difficult things in my life of privilege. I've also not had an EV ride, and I've had to, I've got this sense of duty, and I've lived a real life. That's what it kind of feels like to me a little bit.
I think there's probably a bit of that, yeah. And again, you would want to prove that to people. You would want to say, okay, you guys might be trying hard to make ends meet, but I've been out protecting the country. I've actually done stuff. I've not just sat around. It's a really complicated thing. And I wonder as well, I feel like so much of happiness in life is down to progress. It feels like, every day you judge each day on how it is compared to the previous day. A lot of that, I guess. And when you're born at the top with nowhere to go, I don't really know. You can only go down. So do you think that might be affecting any level of happiness within the royals? Yeah, I mean, I suppose when you have it all, especially financially, then you don't know what it's like to struggle, right? But then the counter argument of that is that when you have instant fame, when you're not looking for it since you're a child, that in itself probably has detrimental effects to your mental health. So when we look at, say, A-listers or social media stars, they want that fame and attention, and they have that narcissism in them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing in the first place. I suppose with any kind of senior, or not senior, but any frontline member of the royal family, they're automatically going to have that. And especially if you're a prince, you have that since you're a child. And then you have something huge in your life, like your mother dying publicly, then there's even more scrutiny on you. So I suppose for me personally, and I think a lot of people probably think this, I feel both a degree of lack of feeling sorry for them because they're so privileged, but also perversely a degree of sympathy because they've got this kind of attention that they didn't want, and is probably quite unique. I don't think there's many other people in the world that have been through that. Yeah, I suppose the sort of Lindsay Lohans and a few of those people who haven't handled that kind of fame as a child well, at all. I saw Macaulay Culkin on Joe Rogan talking about it, and what an unlikely and unique situation it is for a child. So what Prince Harry went through, very, very few children the world over will have experienced that. So I suppose we have to give him something for that. What would you do? Let's say you're in your job as a psychiatrist and Harry pops in tomorrow just before he's considering revealing all this stuff in his book and all that. What advice psychiatrically or psychologically would you give to him?
First of all, solidify a spot on his podcast just to give me some exposure. I suppose I would probably try and get to the bottom of what he actually really wants. Not what he says he wants, but what he actually really wants. Is it to let the public know his version of events because he feels that him and Meghan have been painted unfairly, which is not unreasonable? Is it actually to have a dig at members of the royal family? Like, is it revenge, basically? Is it that he feels that he's been victimized now because he's never really been able to have a say and now he wants his own back? Is it the opposite of that? Is it that he wants to actually genuinely make amends and wants to kind of reconnect with the royal family? And I suppose that's the first thing I'd do. And then I would actually unpick the factual matters and see if they fit with his perception of things. So I'm not calling him a liar, and I haven't assessed him in person, but I think it's at least fair to say that some people think that he might be a bit too sensitive and a bit paranoid, and some of the things that were said or done were he might have read in between the lines. So, to give you a specific example, that comment about the skin color of his child, that could be a very hurtful comment. Absolutely, it could be a really racist thing, or it could just be a genuine kind of inquiry. It's not
we should clarify for anyone who doesn't know what that was.
Go for it.
Oh, well, I don't remember. So, was it a member of the royal family?
Yeah.
A member of the royal family said, we don't know who it was. They haven't revealed who it was, did they? Asked, what will the skin color of your child be?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
So I don't, I mean, we're going off on a tangent here. I don't know if that's racist. As a brown man, as a brown person, if I was to have a mixed race child, if a friend of mine asked that question, if they asked it in an inquisitorial way, like genuinely, what will he look like? I don't think that's offensive. But it's the tone rather than the content of the question, I think. If you're saying it as in, they might look a bit weird and that's not kind of in line with the rest of the royal family, that's very different.
I heard that the person who was asking was wearing a white hood at the time, and I'm joking. It wasn't a member of the KKK. I shouldn't say that word. You get banned off of YouTube. But yeah, I know what you mean. People often ask me, and it's a little bit different, but obviously, being from Jewish origins and stuff, people, will you circumcise your child? Which again is a weird thing, because it's like, why do you have so much interest in the genitalia of my future child? Like, don't worry about it. Like, they don't need the world to know, and I don't care. And but people are just intrigued, I guess. I don't take it as like the insulting thing. I know it is different to a skin color thing, of course.
But it's the way that it's asked, really. I think the tone of how it is asked. So taking that specific issue of Harry's child, it can be asked in a really horrible way, or it could be asked in a possibly slightly naive and clumsy but inquisitive way. So if I was assessing him, I'd really try and unpick to try and get him to understand if what he's feeling is the reflection of the truth of what actually happened. Was he mistreated? Was Meghan mistreated? Or whether he's just being a bit sensitive.
If he was sensitive to a point that it became a disorder, if you found that his version of events differed so much from the reality, would there be a clinical diagnosis? What might that be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I see. So I work as a forensic psychiatrist, as you know, so I do assess people usually who've committed violence, and absolutely there's a huge number of them who are quite paranoid, and that's why they commit violence. And to answer your question, there's lots of different reasons. So it could be that there's no psychiatric disorder and is literally because of the environment they grew up in. So to be specific, I have seen several kind of drug dealers or people that are grown up in gangs or in very violent areas. Most of them happen to come from South London, just because my assessments are in London and there's a high proportion of that in South London. And so I wouldn't say that's a psychiatric disorder. I'd say it's like a survival mechanism, really. So you have to be kind of on alert constantly, because you could literally get beaten up or stabbed or worse because of the people that you're hanging out with or the area you're in. So that's one thing. You could have like a paranoid personality or even a paranoid personality disorder, which is pretty much what it sounds like. So it's when people are very kind of hypersensitive. They take neutral comments as being quite offensive. They misunderstand things when people might, for example, be making a joke or something. They think that's offensive. they hold grudges for a really long period of time. And then on the extreme end of the spectrum, you can have something like a psychosis. So schizophrenia is a good example of that. That's when you have paranoid delusions. So you actually believe that there's a conspiracy and that people are out to get you or to hurt you. Just to be crystal clear, I don't think Prince Harry has any of those things, but I'm just saying that that's what I would be assessing if I saw him.
That's what, if you were assessing him and it was found, so yeah, it's a hypothetical, and it was found that his version didn't, represent what seemed to be the truth. So yeah, it's all, potential things that we don't, you're not diagnosing, because people get angry when you diagnose from afar. You're just saying it could be that. That reminds me of having a conspiracy debunker, Michael Shermer, on the show, and he was saying that evolutionarily it's quite good for us to be paranoid like that and to sometimes misinterpret things, because if you hear a rustling in the bushes and you assume that it's just like the wind, which it probably is, it could be a snake that kills you. But if you are quite of a conspiratorial mind, then it's actually better, and your tribe will evolve better, because you will assume it's a snake, you'll be on guard. And those kinds of people who are more conspiratorial like that are more paranoid on average, and also more paranoid in their relationships and their friendships and families and people around them. So it might just be he is a little bit conspiratorial minded, and I guess in the long run, in terms of millions of years of evolution, that's quite a good thing.
Yeah, I think, absolutely, that's a fair point. And I suppose, going back to Harry, if everything you did is massively scrutinized, and if you're constantly being told what you can and can't do, so something that came out in the Netflix documentary was just the level of control that, again, according to him, that the royal family had, I'd say probably more over Meghan than actually over him. Just like she was told, for example, from memory, she was not allowed to text photos to her own friends if they were taken within royal family territory. So she had to ask for permission for that, for whether she's allowed to send photos to her own friends, because they don't want, photos being leaked that might be unsavory. So if you're under that level of scrutiny, it's kind of clear how that would shape your personality and make you paranoid.
Join me on The Edge for new episodes every week. Start watching right now.